Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Honourable Attorney General, Minister for Economy, Public Enterprise, Civil Service and Communications. Would the Minister inform Parliament if we return to permanent tenure of employment instead of the current contract-based employment is part of the civil service reforms?
Thank you. I invite the Honourable Acting Prime Minister and Attorney General, Minister for Economy, Public Enterprises, Civil Service and Communications to have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this is indeed quite a surprise. There's a question coming from the Honourable Member, who is probably more familiar than a lot of people in this House, in this Parliament, about performance-based systems in employment contracts. But I'd like to just very quickly, before I, by way of background, point out a bit of contradiction. In the Auditor General's report, recommendation 26, which we debated on Monday, which was signed by the Honourable Prasad, where he says no more repeats. In recommendation 26, the recommendation was all future contracts of employment for senior public servants, in particular permanent secretaries, should include contracted agreement that the senior official will participate in all FMIS and Ministry of Finance Central requirements, and any breach of these requirements is then seen as a serious breach of performance contract. So obviously he agrees that contract employment should be there. He's saying that it should only be senior. In any organization, Madam Speaker, you should know that you need to have a consistency in terms of the employment arrangements. That's how good organizations work, Madam Speaker. And as we've said, Madam Speaker, quite emphatically on a number of occasions, let's not try and use the civil service as some political point scoring for the next elections. The reality is this, that the civil servants need to be answerable to 900,000 Fijians. These 900,000 Fijians, Madam Speaker, require a particular level of service. Contract of employments are not peculiar only to the civil service. The organization that he came from USP, the private sector, the NGO level, at the multilateral agency level, at the multilateral organizations, international organizations, everybody has contract employment. It does not in any way diminish the responsibility, nor does it in any way demean the employee. We have, Madam Speaker, in place within government systems now, where you can have contracts up to 3 to 5 years. Employment contracts can be as long as that. Now, Madam Speaker, also as part of the reforms, we found, as some of the members on the other side of the House who have worked in the civil service, many ministries, Madam Speaker, used to have what they call project officers. And these project officers had only 1-year agreements, even in the so-called good old days of permanent tenure. Many of these officers did not know whether the following year they would have a job or not. All of these project officer positions, many of them, and year by year, every budget, if they had listened, we've been actually regularizing. We had people in the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Infrastructure, Ministry of Education, project officers for 10, 15 years. 15 years on a project supposedly, not knowing that they'll have a contract next year or not. They've all been regularized. They all now have permanent security of a contract. So, Madam Speaker, the reality is that this question is very much out of kilter in terms of having a modern employment environment. It also, Madam Speaker, as highlighted yesterday in the response to Honourable Randrondro, that in terms of providing a good work environment, there are other factors that come into play. You need to know, for example, that in terms of not just your recruitment, but also when you're in the service, when you apply for positions, whether it's promotion or different positions, that will also be treated on merit. Not just because somebody is 10 years senior than you and maybe turning up to work only half the day will get the job just because they're 10 years senior to you. We need to reward high-performing employees. This is all part and parcel of what we need to be able to recognize in terms of a modern employment environment. So, Madam Speaker, I mean, this question, of course, is a bit of a bit of what they call a paradoxical question, and I'm being polite. I'm being polite. It's a paradoxical question. One may call it's an oxymoronic. It's an oxymoron. in the English verbiage, it's an oxymoron, to say if the civil service reform will mean return to permanent tenure. Obviously not. There's still about 25% of civil servants, Madam Speaker, who are on permanent tenure, because that's the basis on which they were hired. About 75% are on contracts. And as time, with time, a lot of the 25% percentile will come down. Some people, of course, when they're on the permanent tenure and when they do go on to other positions, they go on contracts. So, Madam Speaker, the reality also is, and a lot has been said about those people who are at the retirement age. Let me also address that. We have a provision in the regulations that should that particular skill set that the particular individual has, if that is a scarce skill set relevant to the overall civil service, relevant to the particular ministry, they have the opportunity to have their contracts renewed on a yearly basis. Because the whole idea is to ensure succession planning. And the regulation does allow for that. If they read the regulation, it says that we need to have succession planning. All of these have been refined. We've stated policies on this for quite some time. They've now been put in regulations. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Professor Biman Prasad.
Now that the Honourable Minister has made it emphatically clear that there would be no tenured contracts for employees in the civil service, can the Minister ensure that the so-called open merit system will guarantee merit, and whether that will be handled by a central ministry of public service or by individual ministries?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I just wonder sometimes, Honourable Prasad. Madam Speaker, the OMRS, as has been stated to this Honourable Parliament now on a number of occasions, is actually been centrally rolled out. I've given a report on this previously. We have said that literally thousands of civil servants have been trained or are being trained and will be trained in respect of the OMRS system. And of course, Madam Speaker, the OMRS has not been ever implemented in the civil service in the manner in which it is currently being implemented. Honourable Prasad knows this very well, many people know this very well, that in the civil service previously when we recruited people, it was based on a number of factors. Your ethnicity, your religion, your denomination, whether you belong to Tovata, Kumbuna, Bure Basanga, all of these things were happening. Of course it was happening, don't deny it. Of course, whether you are all Indian, Fijian, part European, we in fact had ministries, they don't like to hear the truth, we had ministries that used to do an ethnic breakdown. They used to do that. In fact, the 1997 Constitution required that. The 1997 Constitution required that. You see, he's asking what's wrong with that. He doesn't believe in capability or capacity or merit. You see, Madam Speaker, this is the problem with them. And this is unfortunately the problem that Honourable Prasad, he is opening up a door to these things for political gain. For political gain. Yes. Madam Speaker, when we were appointed in 2007, there was a permanent...
Point of order.
Madam, I think the Honourable Attorney General should stick to the answer to the question. I think he is imputing motives, which is not my intention, Madam Speaker. I asked a very clear question, because even in the open merit system, Madam Speaker, if it is handled by different ministries, we know there are already nepotism in different ministries because of the open merit system. So my question was whether the open merit system would be centrally controlled so that there is actually merit-based appointments. That was my question, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I reckon the Honourable Minister was giving examples of some of the things that have been happening previously. Thank you, Honourable Minister. Continue.
Madam Speaker, as I was saying, when we were appointed, there's one particular ministry that we were given as a portfolio. The permanent secretary used to take a cut of the salary of people who he recruited. Some of the women had to sleep with him on a regular basis. That's what they want to go back to. This is a fact. This is a fact. Those of you who worked in the civil service ministry know about it. It is a fact. I don't have to stand here and lie about it, as some people have said that they can lie and say anything they like. This is a fact, Madam Speaker. You see, they want to obfuscate over that. They want to obfuscate over that. They don't like to hear the truth. They don't like to deal with the history that they are trying to sanitize. That's the problem. There is sanitization of history. We need to deal with the facts. We need to look forward. The reality is, Madam Speaker, that the open merit recruitment system, the guidelines, the policy, it's public document. It's rolled out to all the ministries. And under the OMRS system, each respective ministry has to follow those guidelines. If a particular applicant is not happy with the process, they have a redress mechanism. There's a recourse mechanism. The system allows for that. Even an applicant who's not even a civil servant has the ability to apply for that. We had, of course, I know all of you want to target Ministry of Education. We had an issue with the Ministry of Education where they had disciplinary issues that did not go through particular procedures. We found out about that, we rolled it back. We said none of the findings of that ad hoc body will apply. We rolled it back. We fixed the problem. We identified the problem, we fixed the problem. That's how you deal with it. No system, any new system in particular, that has been implemented anywhere has a 100% chance of success. The idea is to mitigate your risks. And the way you mitigate your risks is to say that as soon as a problem is identified, you fix it up. And you have the administrative, and in this case, the political will to fix it up. And we have that. We're not going to bury our head in the sand. Honorable Minister the other day stood up and said, look, the processes, for example, is delayed. We're now fixing it up. He has the gumption to actually admit it. They don't have the gumption to admit anything from the past. Nor do they have the audacity to do so, to tell the truth. Madam Speaker, the fact of the matter is that the OMRS system is a good system. The OMRS system actually is not only applied in the civil service, but throughout outside the civil service too. And Madam Speaker, if there are problems identified, if a particular ministry may not be doing the right thing, we have a centrally located administrative arm that actually oversees this. And we constantly are trying to improve the systems, and that's what's happening. And in fact, we are now training people who sit on the interview panel. We now have a system, Madam Speaker, if, for example, a person, say, senior administrative officer interviews are going to be conducted, they don't only have people from that ministry to actually sit on the panel. There are people from other ministries without any vested interest to come and sit on the panel. Isn't that good? Isn't that good? We have lately in the Solicitor General's office, in the last 3 sets of recruitments, Madam Speaker, 85 to 90% of all the people who've been selected were women. If you look at the history of the Solicitor General's office previously, you see the gender proportion. None of these women who have been recruited recently have been appointed because they were women. They were appointed on merit. They would have never got a peek through the door before. Honorable Karawaki knows the gender composition of the SG's office previously. These are smart, intelligent, dedicated women who have been appointed through an open merit recruitment system. And the OMRS has allowed that to happen. Now some people may say, oh, in that particular recruitment, they were all women. Oh, in that particular recruitment, all people came from Nandronga. So what? So what? If they have been appointed on merit, on their own capability, their own capacity, on their own intellect, on their own experience, that's good. Because that ministry, that department will perform to its best capacity and deliver the best service to the Fijian people. That's what we should be concerned about. They are obsessed with ethnicity. They are obsessed with ethnicity. And we are not. We are obsessed with people, appointing people on merit, on criteria. And most of all, Madam Speaker, we are obsessed of delivering the best service to the Fijian people. And that's what we'll do.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Honourable William Noloka.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let's just come back to some specifics. When civil servants complete their contracts or are terminated, do they receive terminal payments or cash compensation? Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, the way that these contracts operate, like in everywhere, private sector, everywhere else, that you know what the term of your contract is. If you have a 3-year contract, you have a 5-year contract. Prior to the expiration of your contract, it's not terminated, prior to the expiration of your contract, you should know whether your contract will be renewed or not. There are some ministries that are extremely good. They actually are advertising those positions 6 months prior to the expiration of that particular person's position. 6 months, some of them even 9 months, they advertise. Some of them we found there's a bit of laxity, they do advertise a bit later on, which is not a good system. We have rolled out and we said at least you must have those positions advertised 6 months prior. Everybody goes through the interview process. So at least 6 months prior to the person's contract expiring, they should know whether their contract will be renewed or not. So that's how it works, Madam Speaker. You know that you have your contract for a particular period of time. Now generally, Madam Speaker, you'll find also together with this, we are rolling out individual KPIs for each of the staff. Madam Speaker, compensation, Madam Speaker, I don't really want to respond to this. But disrupting my train of thought, with respect. Madam Speaker, so if your term of contract is for 3 years or 5 years, that's the end of the contract. If it's renewed, you go along. Now, Madam Speaker, the compensation, of course, comes in, for example, if there is a redundancy. Madam Speaker, compensation comes on if there is some form or some fault of the employer. Of course, contracts can be terminated earlier. For example, as we saw in the PWD case recently, on the PWD case, where we saw a collusion of some staff from the Ministry of Infrastructure, sorry, I shouldn't say PWD, Ministry of Infrastructure, where they colluded in corrupt practices. Now, for example, if that is found, they can be terminated before that. Now, Madam Speaker, also, if you look at the regulations, in the regulations we've also said, Madam Speaker, which is very important to note, as you know, before there were no, seemed to be any specific rules. So if, for example, there's a disciplinary action against the staff, some of them were suspended without pay, some were suspended with pay, some were suspended with half a pay. These were the different ministries doing different things. And then some people asked to leave their quarters if they were given quarters, etc. But Speaker, under the regulations now, because disciplinary process has taken place against you, it doesn't mean you're still on full pay. Until the matter is referred to the Public Service Disciplinary Tribunal. That's an independent body made of the judiciary. If, for example, the matter is referred to the PSDT, and then the permanent secretary can suspend your pay. If they do, you can immediately go to PSDT and ask for it to be reinstated, if they do that. However, the regulations are quite specific. It says even if the matter is before the PSDT, and even if your pay is suspended, they cannot ask you to evacuate your government quarters. They cannot stop paying you your housing allowance if you're not getting government quarters. Instead of that, you're getting a housing allowance. They cannot do that. Because we don't want the person to be out on the street with their family. So, you are allowed to stay in the government quarters, even if the matter is before the PSDT. Unless, of course, somebody makes an application otherwise. But as of right, even if you've been charged under the Public Service Disciplinary Matters, you still have a roof over your head, or you still get your housing allowance. So it is a very fair way, and it's also a very compassionate way to deal with such matters. Before, it did not happen. It was all willy-nilly. Now with this reform processes, we made it very abundantly clear. These are the processes to follow. Now, so therefore the issue of compensation does not arise unless there have been certain breaches. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I give the floor to Honorable Josefa Bilak-Virata.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, you know, the way this contract-based employment had been handled is very inhuman, because some of the staff, when the time is up, they are told to go home when the process is not complete. So they don't know, and they are not on pay. So the question I would like to ask the Honourable Minister is there has been any analysis, comparative analysis, on the performances of people on long-term employment and people on short-term contract, like what you're proposing?
There are short-term contracts. 3 to 5 year contracts. 3 to 5 year contracts. And that's what happens in the private sector. You go to university institutions, everywhere it happens, 3 to 5 year contracts. Very, very standard. What the Honourable Member is saying about some ministries where there have been laxity, I've already said that. Some ministries have dropped the ball, no doubt. Whenever contracts have had to be renewed, some ministries have dropped the ball. And this is a matter that we have urgently, in fact we've had discussions, 2 rounds of discussion with the permanent secretaries, because they are the ones with whom the contract is signed between the permanent secretary and the employee. So we have raised this, we've raised this as an issue. We accept that there have been certain instances where people have dropped the ball. And in fact, we've apologized to those staff, and I apologize again for those of whom we have not apologized. That if your particular permanent secretary has dropped the ball on that, as Minister for Civil Service, I apologize to those staff. However, going forward, as we've already said to the permanent secretaries, it's a mark against them if it happens again. And in fact, I've already spoken to the chairman of the Public Service Commission, who is the who's the employer of the permanent secretaries, because they employ them independently. And we've said that we cannot tolerate any permanent secretary dropping the ball on that. However, that does not in any way undermine the contractual responsibilities and obligations, nor does it in any way undermine the philosophy behind the contract of employment that we put in place. Because we have found on the flip side, Honourable Member, a lot more people are performing a lot more better. We have found also on the flip side, Madam Speaker, a lot more people who previously did not want to apply for positions are actually applying for positions both from within government and from outside. You'd be surprised how many young people are now applying for positions in ministries they would never dream of applying for, because they always thought it was a closed shop. In fact, previously, one of the criteria of selection was they must have public sector experience. How can a person who's worked in the private sector have public sector experience? That is one way of shutting them out. That cannot be the only criteria. So, Madam Speaker, we now have a good pool of people who are applying, people with different skill sets, and government, as we know, that the ministers will tell you, the honourable members will tell you that type of transactions that are taking place now in governments actually did not take place 30, 40 years ago. Things to do with electronics, with technology, with the type of problems, the types of issues that people are facing now is very different. So we need to have the right skill sets in the civil service itself too, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the Honourable Alvin Maharaj.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just like any private sector, there are many advantages of having staff on contract basis. Can the Minister elaborate on the advantage of having contracted staff in civil service in regards to non-performing staff and non-productive staff, and how it's going to have the impact on service delivery?
Thank you. Honourable Acting Prime Minister.
Just to reiterate, Madam Speaker, I think the issue, of course, is that in respect of key performance indicators, we are now, through the Civil Service Reform Unit, also sitting down with the permanent secretaries and the HR people. In fact, talking about HR personnel, Madam Speaker, if you look at most of the ministries previously, and some of the ministries still now, the people who actually head the HR departments are some clerks who just climbed up the ladder, or some administrator just climbed up the ladder without actually having any specific training, exposure, qualification in human resource management, and how to nurture and cultivate an environment where the human resources of that ministry actually feels motivated. So you see, the HR side of things in many ministries has been neglected, it's been relegated. They're simply paper pushers. Somebody applies, they simply say, okay, you know, maybe we'll get this person in, or somebody wants to go on training, they'll send them away on training. There has not been no professionalization of the HR departments. So that's very important. As part and parcel of that, we need to have a very professional HR division in all the different ministries. They need to be able to talk to each other too, across all the ministries. And so we are working with them, with the respective permanent secretaries, the ministers, in terms of the KPIs. The KPIs must be tied in with the ministry's objectives. The ministry's objectives, of course, must be tied in with the objectives of government in terms of the output of the respective ministries. So it is very, very critical. And one of the messages we always have, Madam Speaker, is that every single civil servant is as important as the other. You know, sometimes people sit around and complain about drivers, you know, or not coming on time, etc., or they don't treat them well. But the day that the driver does not come to work, everything stops still, because they cannot get from A to B. So everybody in the civil service plays a pivotal role, and it is the responsibility and the challenge for every permanent secretary, every HR department, to make every single civil servant feel very, very important. To make them understand that with their non-performance, it can affect the entire ministry. If the entire ministry does not perform well, it affects the service delivery. The culture, Madam Speaker, in the civil service for decades has been, they don't view the individual Fijian citizen as their client. They don't see them as their customer. In most instances, they just see them as a nuisance. Oh, that fellow is again complaining about his application. Oh, that fellow is harassing me all the time. We have to change that culture. In the same way, we have to change the culture in Parliament, and I know some of us are doing that on both sides of Parliament, in terms of being responsive to the electorate. We need to be responsive to the electorate. In the same way, the civil servants need to see the customers as they need to see the citizens of our country as their customers, as their clients. They are their bosses. They need to treat them well. They need to answer the phone calls. Many ministries before, the phone would ring and ring and ring. Nobody would pick it up. People walk past it. Lunchtime, things shut down. We need to constantly improve that. So that requires a huge cultural shift, and that goes towards, in terms of what Honorable Maharaj is talking about, in terms of service delivery and how we actually measure the performance. And one of the key ways of measuring performance is your ability to also know how you're going to provide service to members of the public. The other last point, Madam Speaker, I'd like to highlight is many ministries for decades have operated in silos. There's a lot of territorial warfare. Lands Department is doing this, Agriculture is doing this, Titles Office is doing their own thing, everybody takes their own time. There's no collaboration. Somebody, Honorable Prasad, talked about the ease of doing business. Yes, we admit, one of the reasons why the ease of doing business at instances have been delayed has because the lack of collaboration between the different agencies. They've been operating in silos. And some of the laws actually, unfortunately, force them to operate as silos. So we are actually currently looking at all the laws. So if, for example, if I want to apply for a building permit, the application goes to NFA, it goes to Municipal Council, it goes to OHS, it goes to Town and Country Planning, all the different, it may go to FEA. So we need to get all of them together and be able to get them to sit in one shop or one place and to give the approvals. But some of the laws actually, Madam Speaker, actually prohibits that. So we have to re-look at the laws too. And that requires some revamping. But we are working on it. But unfortunately, that has led to a particular level of mentality of, territoriality in the different ministries. So we need to get them to also change that culture to be able to have that level of output that is required by the citizens of Fiji.